Hi everyone, this is Prasha, and today your host is Catherine Hatcher. To learn more about Catherine, check out our last episode and the format we're following these 2 weeks. This is a format we've never tried before, and for the first time ever, we have a guest host. We think opening up our platform to guest hosts will diversify the questions and enrich the stories we wish to share. Hope you enjoyed this as much as we enjoyed creating it. Do share your feedback by connecting with us on social media at Her STEM Story. Our Diversity in STEM sticker is still up for grabs. The sticker is available on Genius Lab Gear, so we're giving away one free sticker if you leave us a review on iTunes. And once you do that, please take a screenshot and email it to us at herstemstory@gmail.com or DM it to us at herstemstory on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. So let's get started with this amazing STEM story.
Hey y'all, I'm really excited to share with you a conversation I had with Stephanie from Steph Sci Access on Instagram. Stephanie basically exemplifies advocating for accessibility in science and science communication, both through her Instagram and through her daily work. She's currently a PhD student at Virginia Tech, where she studies nutrition and ovarian cancer metabolism. She also works at the campus's Accessible Technologies office, and she talks about a lot of the great work that she's done over the years at Virginia Tech through that program. She has such an inspiring presence on Instagram, where she talks about accessibility, nutrition, science communication. She even has this great nutrition basics series going on right now. She even talks about body positivity and just improving accessibility in science in general for all people. So I'm really excited to dive in and learn about Stephanie's research, her scientific journey, and ways to make science information more accessible for all folks and all people.
Welcome to Her STEM Story, a podcast about real women with extraordinary science, technology, engineering, and mathematics stories. In this show, we'll talk to some absolutely inspiring women and highlight some women-led organizations in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We'll learn more about their work, their struggles, and how they think we can close the gender gap in STEM professions. Keep listening to get inspired.
Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. So if you're nervous, I'm nervous. So
no, I'm pretty nervous. I'm not going to lie.
I think that's perfect because then we have some nervous energy, which will hopefully translate into, something exciting.
Yeah. Hopefully I just don't stutter over my words the whole time. It's fine.
So I think I'll start off with just asking you a little bit about your PhD. Like, what do you do? I know you're a graduate student. I follow you on Instagram, obviously.
Oh,
we were just chatting yesterday.
Yes.
But I want to know a little bit about what you do and how you got there. I'd love to start there.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about what I do. So I'm at Virginia Tech in the Department of Human Nutrition, Foods, and Exercise. And I study ovarian cancer. So in studying ovarian cancer, I look at cellular metabolism and like how those cells make energy and how that relates to obesity and like consuming high fat diets and stuff like that. So I got there kind of by accident, actually. I did my undergraduate degree in biology. I loved it, but it was a very broad biology degree. So I did things like vertebrate zoology and ecology. And like I even did a research project my senior year on plant population genetics. And then I wanted to go into kind of like a healthcare setting. So for my master's, I was like, wow, like I really like nutrition and like kind of studying how it interacts like actually in the body. So I was like, okay, well, I'll be a dietitian. Like that's a great way to like actually practice with nutrition. And I got to my master's and realized quickly that I couldn't really find like a place that I fit in dietetics because I was really only interested in like a very specific niche. And also I don't know how much you know about the field of dietetics, but in order to become a registered dietitian, you have to have like your 4-year degree and your verification statement saying that you completed all the necessary coursework. And then you have to complete like a year-long unpaid internship, which you have to pay for. And then you can sit for the exam to become a registered dietitian. I also realized quickly that I couldn't afford it either. So because for the internship, you're basically working 40 hours a week and you have to pay the institution, with wherever you go to do your internship, you have to pay them to do it, and then you don't get paid. So it was very much people had to rely on like their families or their significant others or like, you know, huge amounts of student loans. And I was like, I don't think I can do that because I didn't have like, you know, that financial support from any other place besides like a loan. And I didn't really want to take out like over $15,000 worth of loan just for
1 year.
Yeah.
Like an internship.
Yeah, exactly. And the price of the internships vary. But I was going to have to do the one that was at Virginia Tech, which I think is like either $9,000 or $10,000. So like you have to do that. And then obviously you have to live, right? So you have to pay your rent and you have to like eat. So it was going to be like a huge financial investment for me being in a very specific area that didn't really have a lot of jobs, because I wanted to do inborn errors of metabolism, like phenylketonuria, things like that. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. Like a bottle of diet soda, it always has a warning on it. It says like phenylketonuria X warning contains phenylalanine. If you ever look at like a diet soda or anything that contains like an artificial sweetener, especially aspartame, aspartame is actually a combination of 2 amino acids, one of those being phenylalanine. And if you have phenylketonuria, which you're born with, it's a genetic condition, you can't break down phenylalanine. And so you have to be very careful with what you consume because you can't break it down, it will build up in your system. And it's usually a newborn screening. So if you're born with it, you're usually found pretty early with that condition. Thinking about it, amino acids are in like any kind of protein, right? So like you can't really eat meat. You can't really eat like a ton of certain vegetables because they have high phenylalanine content. So you very much have to like have a very strict diet. And I thought like it was so fascinating, like the genetic and like molecular mechanisms behind that, and like how that translated into like what you can eat kind of thing. So that I was very interested in a very specific field. And there are only like 3 dietitians in the entire state of Virginia that do that. So it was a lot of financial risk for, you know, maybe getting a job in what I was actually passionate about with dietetics. So I got to like my second year of my master's and I was like freaking out. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? And I happened to be in a class that my department offers called translational science. And that's actually where I met my current advisor, because they had different professors within the department come and kind of lecture about what they do and everything. And she kind of laid out this like beautiful story about like metabolism and cancer and like nutrition and like all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, it's like everything I've ever dreamed of. So I literally then set up a meeting with her like right after that class. I was like, listen, like I want to talk to you about what you do. And ended up like going and talking to her and like hiking, convincing her to be like, take me on, be like, I have my own funding. I can be a teaching assistant. Like, just let me in your lab. And she's like, okay, yeah, sure. So I kind of forced myself upon her, but it turned out really good. And I really like where I'm at now. I had never taken a cancer class. I'd never studied cancer before. So I just kind of happened upon it. But now that I'm here, I really enjoy it.
So did you always know that you wanted to go into something science, or was it in college you ended up in a biology major? Like, what was that part of your story like?
I changed my degree path like 4 times during my undergrad, because for some reason I thought, you know, I really loved science in high school.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed my biology degree. Like during that time, I loved that degree and that program. But for some reason I just thought like, oh, I have to be in the healthcare field. So like I changed my trajectory within the healthcare field several times, because I'm like, okay, well, I want to be an occupational therapist. I was like, no, I want to be a physical therapist. And then I was like, no, I want to be a medical doctor. And I was like, no, and I want to be a dietitian. But it's kind of like along the way, I enjoyed my undergrad so much. So once I got to my master's and I wasn't doing like some basic lab research, I was like, wow, I miss that so much. And that's kind of what like made me realize like, hey, I actually really love being in the lab. I really love doing basic science research. And maybe that is a viable career option for me besides just going into healthcare, right? Because I feel like most people that are in like an undergrad science degree are kind of like shuttled toward healthcare.
Yes. And
that's not necessarily the only path you could take.
Yeah. I feel like it's always pre-med, pre-dental, pre-vet, pre-something. And it's like, I feel like only the students that get opportunities in labs are the ones that even realize maybe that's a potential option. But even then, it's not that common.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then we get into grad school and then we're all like a bunch of science nerds.
Yeah, which I'm happy with.
Which is awesome. So you also do like a lot of science communication, or that's something you're starting to get into. So how did you figure out that that was something you were passionate about?
I saw the Nature article that was written about Science Sam.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I found her through that article. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is like really cool that you can post things on Instagram or like Twitter or something and like, teach people about science without having to like be in person and everything. So I thought about it for like a year. Like I just started following other science communicators and I was like, I really want to do this. I don't know that I have time, but I was like, I really enjoy that. And it's something that I do want to do. So then I ended up making my like science communication Instagram. I think it was in December of this past year. I love the opportunity to kind of like talk about nutrition and cancer and also accessibility, like all in this one platform and be able to like impact way more people than I would have if I had just done it in person.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that makes you unique, because I feel like there's a lot of science communicators out there, which is great. We want to get a lot of voices out there, and the more people we have, the more diverse voices we have. But you have this angle of accessibility in science, and it's amazing and beautiful and so exciting. And I want to know how you got there. Like, what was that process like?
So I will go ahead and like recognize my privilege as an able-bodied person. I am not in any way, shape, or form, advocating for them, like being their voice, because I feel like kind of putting the actual people that's like experiencing it, like putting them out there is really important.
Absolutely.
But kind of what my how I kind of got into this is I have like a very specific experience like working in accessibility. And I knew that a lot of people didn't have that experience or didn't have that background. And so even though I have that privilege as an able-bodied person and I want to kind of put forth the voices of people who may identify differently, I wanted to use my experience working in that setting to kind of educate others so that like I could do that work and it wasn't just people who were like, experiencing that were having to educate everyone. Right. So how I kind of got into it, I also feel like I lucked out in this regard. But the summer before I started my master's degree at Virginia Tech, actually my husband was working in the accessible technologies office, and he was working more as a coder. So he was like doing more like hard computer science stuff. And his supervisor, Krista, she asked him, she was like, hey, like, do you know anybody that would be interested in being a Braille transcriber? Like, they don't need to know Braille. I could teach them, but like, who do you think's interested? And he's like, well, actually my then girlfriend had just moved up to Virginia Tech. And so I interviewed for the position and got it. And I was, I kind of got thrown into it, but it was such a cool experience because I hadn't really done anything related to that before. So when I got there, I learned grade 1 Braille, and I learned some like software like Perky Duck, Duxbury, and I was able to help transcribe a quantum mechanics textbook that first summer. Yeah, it was tough, I'm not going to lie, because not only did I have to learn Braille, but I also had to learn Nemeth code, which is like a different version of Braille that's specifically for math and science. So before Andrew Nemeth created Nemeth code, there was not anything that could kind of translate like really higher level equations into Braille. And so he made that code specifically for those higher level equations. So I had to learn Nemeth code also for that textbook. And I loved it so much. I was like, listen, I'm going to be here a while. Like, I will work for you for like however long, like, even though it's not even related to my research, it's not related to my degree at all, but I loved it so much. And so after that first summer as a Braille transcriber, I came back the next summer and actually worked on developing tactile graphics. So that's just, obviously what the name implies, that they're tactile versions of like 2D pictures. So that summer I helped transcribe like photographs from a neuroanatomy textbook into the tactile version, like the Braille version. And that was tough, I'm not going to lie, because when you make tactile graphics, you kind of have to like boil down the like main message of the picture and like put it in a form that is like easily understood by just feeling it. And with that one, it was, you know, a thing that came in really handy with that job was I had that biology background. And so I was able to like look at a picture and be like, okay, this is like the main purpose of this picture. This is what's really important about it. And be able to use that to help transcribe the graphics.
I'm just thinking of like, you know, an inside of a cell, all of those different genes and proteins and all those different signals. Like, how the heck would you boil a picture like that? I'm amazed. Like, I don't. And then to think about how you would then read that from a raised graphic perspective, like
and I think one thing to keep in mind also that sighted individuals, like if you're looking at a picture, usually you're looking at the whole picture and then you're kind of zooming in on the parts that are important of it, right? Whereas if you're using a tactile version, you're doing more like part to whole processing. So you're feeling the different parts in order to like kind of get the whole picture in your head, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, in big cases like where you have a graphic that is like really super complicated. So like there were some of them that was like, I'm thinking of one in particular that was a picture of like the brain and the brain stem, and then showing like each individual like vertebrae going to each individual like part of the body that it corresponded to. So like we had to take that graphic and kind of like boil down, okay, what's the important parts? Like how is it using color to signify importance? Like how can we kind of divide this up and make this like a bigger graphic or even 2 pages so that it makes sense and you can follow along easiest, right? So you're kind of getting rid of the extraneous details. Like, you know, if the brain is just there, just a picture of the brain, you don't really need to put all the like different like grooves and ridges and stuff in it, right? Because it's not really important. But, you know, thinking about like, what is the color signifying? What's the point of this picture? And then getting like boiling it down to that so that you can then put it on like a tactile version is kind of like the most important thing. It was like it was hard to like learn that. But once I learned it, it was like, okay, like this makes sense. And like, it was easier to make a lot of different graphics. I also had to learn how to use like Adobe Illustrator and stuff like that, which is a useful skill, but it took a while also. So I did that. And then I also have been involved. I created the alternative text for an open source textbook that Virginia Tech has. I think it's a Fundamentals of Business textbook. But I went through that whole textbook and made all of the alternative text for all of the pictures and graphs and things in that. And then I've also worked as a captioner for the office. So I kind of do the odd jobs, like whatever they need me to do. But it's been such a cool experience to be able to do all of that and learn how to do that it's kind of like I said, even though it's not related to my PhD and it's not really like, you know, related to my research, it's still something I'm really passionate about because now I know all this and I want to tell other people about it.
And you do that on Instagram a lot. I feel like you're one of the few people, at least that I follow and that I see regularly in my feed, that is talking about how we can use the tools that are already available to us, either through second or third party apps or the tools that Instagram has, how we can make science accessible and how like using alternative text and captions in our stories and stuff like that. So in your opinion, other people who are communicating science or even just communicating some sort of important message on social media, what can we do to make it more accessible for all sorts of folks, not just us? How can we make it more accessible?
Yeah, so I do have, if you do go to my Instagram page, I have like an accessibility highlight that I kind of like, I not only like explain some ways that we can make things more accessible, but I also explain how to do it there. But briefly what I'll go over some like 3 big things that I think is really important for like, especially digital accessibility. So you've already mentioned 2 of them, alternative text and captioning. So alternative text is important, especially for Instagram, because it's a platform that's built on basically just pictures, right?
Yep.
If you don't put an alternative text tag like in your posts, and you have a screen reader that's reading your like profile, it literally just says image. So like the whole point of your Instagram, like all the pictures that you take and post and like take all the time to edit and put out there and make relevant, they become completely shut off unless you use that alternative text. And it's so easy to add, and you can go back and add it in a post that you've already even posted. You don't have to add it from the beginning. But I think it's especially important for Instagram. You can also do that on Twitter. So you can go into like your settings and be able to add alternative text in there. I am personally not a big Twitter user. I try to be more of a Twitter user, but I'm hardly ever like posting pictures on Twitter besides what I post on Instagram. So, and then with Facebook can automatically generate some alternative text. It's not super amazing, but it does automatically make some kind of alternative text. And some tips that I have for alternative text, I think I also put these in my accessibility highlight on my Instagram profile. But basically, you're just describing like the important points of the picture, giving like tons of extraneous details. Like, you don't have to describe the whole background or like every single thing that's in the picture. Just kind of giving a general overview of what the picture is. Like if the picture has text, like saying what the text is, or just saying like, oh, this is a selfie of Stephanie wearing a blue shirt or something like that. Like just to give some kind of context. You don't want to make it super long unless it's like a very specific graphic that you want to describe all the points, because all the points are important. But otherwise, it's kind of hard to like sit there and listen to like a whole paragraph of description when you're just trying to get through like the other pictures in the profile. So I guess that's some tips for alternative text. And then captioning was the other one that you mentioned. Captioning, especially for Instagram stories, I think is something that is easy to do. And like it's not only benefits people with maybe hearing impairments, but like captioning really benefits everyone, in my opinion, because half the time I'm like scrolling through Instagram and I'm watching people's stories and I'm like in public without headphones, and I don't want to just like turn my story, like all the volume all the way up to listen to it, right? Yeah, because it's awkward, right?
Yep.
But if someone has captioned their Instagram stories, like, okay, I can see what they're saying without having to actually listen to it. And it's, you know, obviously it's important for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but, you know, that's kind of an accessibility for everyone kind of thing.
I'll be honest, I skip stories if I'm like not listening because I'm at work or, you know, where I shouldn't be on Instagram, or, you know, if I'm like not wanting to listen or I'm watching TV, I will just skip stories where people aren't using captions. And if they're talking, because I'm like, I don't want to turn on my volume.
Yeah, exactly. Like the captions are so nice to have. And I really hope in the future Instagram makes like their own captioning feature. That would be super nice. But for now, I use the captioning app Clip-O-Matic.
Yeah.
It's pretty accurate. Like you know, any kind of, you know, automated captioning, like OCR thing is going to not be like 100% accurate, but, it, you know, is useful, and I can sometimes do it with very minimal editing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does kind of glitch and get on my nerves, but you know, that's going to be any kind of captioning app. So
yeah,
I think it's worth taking that extra step to record the captions and then upload it. Because like I said, it increases accessibility for everyone. And it's useful for everyone. And then, my third thing that I would say is probably like my biggest thing for social media accessibility is, color contrast. So I think I've talked about this before also. I talked about it in, reference to an experiment that I ran. I ran an experiment and it spit out like a graph, and it was like this mint green color on a white background. And I was like, I can't see this. Like, I don't know what this is because it has such low color contrast. But in social media and like online, it's so easy to just like, if you're trying to create something, for example, like a handout or a graphic or something like that, it's so easy to be able to plug those colors into a color contrast checker and see if it's actually, you know, has enough contrast to be able to be seen by people even with low vision. So the color contrast checker that I use is webaim.org. If you like just type in webaim color contrast checker into Google, you'll probably find it easily that way. But you can type in the hex codes for your foreground and your background color, and then it will literally just tell you whether or not it has enough contrast, if it passes or not. And that color contrast is kind of like the difference in brightness between the two colors. So if you have like white text on a white background, its color contrast is like 1:1. But if you have black text on a white background, it's like 21:1. And the minimum ratio is like 4.5:1. And you would be surprised, like sometimes you can see something and you're like, oh, that has plenty of contrast. Like, I think that's fine. And then you plug it in and it doesn't. So that color contrast checker is, really easy to use. It's easy to Google the hex codes of the different colors you're using and be able to have your information accessible to people who have low vision or vision problems or some difference in visual acuity, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I teach histology at a vet school, and we use a lot of pinks and purples and shades of pinks and purples, obviously with the type of staining that we do for our tissues. And I've asked, like, what do we do for students who are visually impaired? And I kind of get like shrugged shoulders, and it makes me very upset because it's like, how do we make this material accessible to any student? Like, and then you're setting one student apart because of whatever ability that they have, and it just is so frustrating. And
yeah.
Unfortunately, like, we're told that there's not much that we can do short of just describing it like to the student manually, which is frustrating.
Yeah, I kind of get that same frustration, especially with using like different dyes and things in the lab. Like if you're using a lot of red and green, but you have like red and green color blindness, like that doesn't help someone who has that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think really the only, like, I don't really know if I have any like good advice because there are different dyes you can use. And I think like you can be, if you want to be an advocate for that, like asking your PI or your advisor or whoever you work for, like, hey, can we use a different dye if one exists? And I think another way that we can kind of get past that. So obviously if you're turning in an image for like publication, like they want the original, right? But I think it would kind of be cool. And I don't know if this is like even a thing that we can do, but obviously you can go into like Photoshop and edit colors. So like, I wonder if you could make an accessible version. Like I said, I don't know if that's something that could be.
Our images are actually like digitized. And so I've thought about this, and now you're inspiring me to actually do something about it, because we don't often end up with students who have visual issues, but it does happen. It does happen occasionally. I know we've had some students in the past who need like larger text and things like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues of people or, privileged people only getting into vet school anyways. That's a whole different conversation. We can
I understand.
have on a different day.
Kind of the same thing with nutrition. So
oh yeah, especially like you're mentioning, people, you have to pay for an internship, and you have to pay for all these things that somebody who might not have the ability to do so, or only can do it in loans.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think I think you or somebody else was talking about recently on social media. If this wasn't you, I apologize. Somebody was talking about hashtags and how like having, it might've been somebody else on Twitter.
I think it was me. I made a post about hashtags recently.
Oh, thank goodness. But like having hashtags be, yes, it was you. Yeah. Woo, my brain. But like having hashtags, the way that you write a hashtag actually makes a significant difference for somebody who is using like a digital reader. So I had no idea. I'm changing the way I use hashtags now, but
I'm so
talk a little bit more about that, because that's such an easy fix for anybody to do when you're writing your posts. And so tell me, like, how should I write my hashtags?
Yeah. So basically, like I was thinking of the example of a very long hashtag, right? Like, and I feel like people only use really long hashtags if they're for doing like irony or something. Like,
yes.
I feel like you see like so many celebrities doing that. I don't know. It's a thing. But if you capitalize the first letter of every word in your hashtag, it makes it so much easier to read that hashtag. I did test it out with VoiceOver. So when I made that post, I tested the 2 hashtags that are in my caption with VoiceOver, which is the screen reader that's on iPhones. And it could read both of them fairly well. It did kind of mix up the words at the end of the hashtag. So obviously using short hashtags would be very beneficial to a screen reader. But in terms of like capitalization, I don't know that it would give a benefit to a screen reader. I'd have to see other screen readers besides VoiceOver. But I feel like it gives so much accessibility in like general. So like to someone who has low vision, or to someone who, you know, has to like sit there and like really think about what this hashtag is saying. Like, I think I said in that post, like sometimes I can see like a really long hashtag and like, what is this trying to say? Like, I cannot connect these letters. Like, it's hard to like visualize and then like comprehend what is being said if you don't capitalize the first letter of every word. But like, that's such an easy fix because it's literally just taking the time like you would normally to capitalize the first letter of every word. And it doesn't affect how the hashtag is used. So I think that is, you know, something that everyone could do. That's like so easy. Like, you're not even taking like an extra step besides like punching your, like your caps button on your phone or something like that. But it does make it like so much easier to read and so much more accessible. And like I said, it doesn't affect how it acts. So it's an easy fix.
It is an easy fix, and our eyes are looking for differences in patterns anyways, like regardless of your visual ability.
Exactly.
That's just naturally what we're doing. And so it makes so much sense. Like when I read my own hashtags now, I'm like, oh, why haven't I been doing this before? It's so easy. So like you mentioned earlier, you come from a place of privilege. You're an able-bodied person. You don't have, you know, any hearing impairments or visual impairments, but you are I would consider you, at least from my perspective, an advocate for people who do need a little bit more support, or at least community support from other scientists. So yeah, how can anybody advocate for people of all sorts of abilities, not just able-bodied people? Because I know we all come from different perspectives and what we think we can do. But especially on social media and raising these voices of individuals who are sharing their stories on social media, what can we do?
I think that's a great question. And, you know, I think you mentioned previously that, you know, there are obviously people on social media that have different experiences and different, like, you know, body types and body abilities and things like that. And so I think finding those individuals, like, not only so that you can, like, you know, obviously learn about them and, like, you know, learn about their lives and what they're kind of doing and how they advocate for themselves, but then also so how you can kind of take what they're saying and then, like, apply it to how you're, like, kind of doing things, I guess, if that makes sense. Just so that, you know, because I don't want to speak for someone who has a different ability than me, because obviously I have, like, my ability and I can't speak for anybody with any kind of different ability. But if I can kind of obviously learn from them in a way that I can then make what I'm doing accessible to them and other people of other abilities, you know, not saying that they have to educate us, right? So I mentioned earlier, like, you know, it's not their job to educate us, but just that we have a varied experience of, like, you know, how we view a scientist or how we view even, you know, somebody that's just out, like, you know, doing whatever, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a scientist. But, you know, knowing those people, getting to know those people, and then, like, elevating their voices is, I think, a way that you can kind of take someone's, like, actual real life experience rather than just saying, yeah, accessibility. Like, you know, you have, like, a face behind, you know, who kind of is, like, the advocate for it, I guess. And then I think another way that we can be an advocate for accessibility is, like, practicing what we preach, right? So I feel like a lot of the times, like, because I do education on accessibility and how we can increase it, right? But I also get a lot of questions from people, even when I'm not actively teaching about it, because I have captions on my Instagram videos. Like, I talk about alt text, that kind of thing. And even though I may not actively be saying, like, hey, you need to do this, people still see that I'm doing it and they're like, oh, that's really cool. How do you do that? And why do you do that? So even when I'm not actively teaching about it, people are still learning about it, right? So actually practicing accessibility, even if it's not, like, necessarily visible, right? So, like, alt text is not visible unless you get on my profile with a screen reader, right? But still doing it, even though, you know, might not be somebody like actively seeing it or using it at that moment, I think is still important, because that's kind of the difference between accessibility and accommodation. So accommodation is kind of when we design like an education or a space or like a classroom or a handout a certain way for like, you know, the majority, right? So like people who don't necessarily need a different version of that, right? So like if we think about a handout, we might just make a physical handout of that. But then like, you know, whenever somebody has a different need, they have to come up to you and say, hey, like I can't access your material. Can you remake it in a form that I can access it? So that's accommodation, which is kind of the, like what's used in higher education and like other areas right now. But accessibility is like kind of making that in a form that everyone can use from the get-go, so that you're not having to like force the person who needs the accommodation to ask for it. Right. So, you know, even though I have no idea if anyone is actively reading my profile with a screen reader, but my information is already accessible so they don't have to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is a huge way that anybody, regardless of ability or anything like that, can be an advocate for it just by using it, because we see other people use it and we're like, oh, wow, like that's really cool. And that's something I could do too.
One thing I saw Science Sam talking about, I think it was probably at the beginning of the year, maybe late last year, was auto captioning at conferences, like when you're giving a talk.
Yeah.
And like how that should be kind of a norm, but unfortunately it's not.
Yeah.
Do you know any systems that we can use? Like, do you use anything in your teaching, or do you know of any systems that we can use for something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So one that is super accessible to everybody, like you don't have to go out and buy a fancy software to do this, is Google Slides. So Google Slides actually has a captioning feature, a live captioning feature built into it now, which is super amazing. I love that they added that. I've actually used that when I lecture, like in the class that I'm a teaching assistant for. So you can literally put your slides into Google Slides, and then when you go into presenter mode, you can pick to add captions to it. And so it will automatically caption. It's, you know, it kind of, for the presenter, you kind of have to stay near your computer, which is like one downside of it, but they're pretty accurate, and it'll like start to caption and then it'll go back and correct itself, which is kind of cool. So it's really accurate, actually. I was really impressed when I used it. And that's, you know, something you don't have to buy. So you can use that right now if you wanted to, because you most likely have access to Google Slides in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So I think, and I have attended like online seminars and stuff with Science Sam, in which she's used Google Slides, because you can like screen share that also. So even if you're doing a webinar or something like that, you can still use Google Slides and share your screen, and then you'll have that captioning on there also. One bug that I've seen in it is I can't figure out how to have my like notes up with the presentation. So I have to print out my notes, which I would prefer not to do, but that might just be also user error. So there might be a way that you could have both up at the same time, and I just don't know it. That's something I'm going to look into more. I did use the captioning feature in the class that I TA for. So I had to give 2 lectures this semester. I used it for one, and then I didn't use it for the other. And I don't think there's anybody in the classroom that has any kind of accommodation. And so a lot of them, I don't know if they kind of got the reason why I was using it. I tried to explain, but I think they still got distracted by it. And so like a lot of able-bodied students were like, it's distracting, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, is it, or are you just on Facebook? So I don't know. It's just like sometimes able-bodied students are like, it's distracting, but it's like, okay, yeah, but you know, it's also useful for like the people in the back of the class, or like someone who,
or
you know,
like
has
my roommate, she is from Brazil and her first language is Portuguese. Like she does not speak English as her first language. I mean, she speaks English, she's learned English, but it's not her first language. And so we have captions on the TV. We have it on HBO. We have it on Netflix. And it's like, at first it was distracting for me, but now it's like, I prefer having the captions on when I'm watching TV.
Yeah.
It's not just about like ability. It's about like you have been saying a few times, accessibility for all people. It's not just about, you know, whether or not you're hearing impaired. It could just be that somebody's language is maybe not at the same level of development as another person. And so just having those captions just makes it that much more accessible to them.
Yeah. And I think it's easier also to take notes with that, because if you miss what the person just said, it's still on the screen.
Yep.
So even if you, like you said, don't have a hearing impairment or something like that, if you speak another language or you're trying to take notes or you're in the back of the classroom and you can't hear what the professor said, they're useful for everybody. It's not just somebody that, needs some kind of accommodation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I didn't get to ask, but I kind of want to ask now that we're going to be wrapping up is what advice do you have for maybe younger students or even graduate students who might want to make the switch into a research field like yours, into cancer research or nutrition research? Do you have any little tidbits of advice for those people?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, be open and willing to pursue something that you have a passion for. So even though, I had this whole time, going from my undergrad into my master's, I was like, I have to be in the healthcare field. I have to. I was open to the fact that, I had tried out different healthcare fields and I didn't like them. And then I found this new thing with what I'm doing with my PhD. And I was like, wow, I really like that. Having the courage to pursue that, even though it's not kind of what you planned, I think is really big. So that can go for any field, right? If you are interested in nutrition or cancer research or anything like that, I think, especially with more basic science fields, a lot of people assume, even professors, assume that you have to have a very straightforward trajectory. So when I was trying to figure out what I was doing next during my master's, this is before I found my current advisor. I actually met with a couple of professors in different departments that were more basic science, kind of asked them what would it look like if I was trying to try to get into your program? And I had multiple people tell me, well, I don't really understand why you did your master's in this. And it kind of looks bad because it's not related, because it wasn't a basic science master's degree. And, putting them aside, you don't have to have a straightforward trajectory. You don't have to study cancer in your undergrad and then cancer in your master's and then cancer in your PhD. If you have that passion and the ability to learn about it and kind of have that basic background, you can really choose to do anything that you're passionate about for your PhD. Because like I said, I'd never ever taken a cancer class until literally this semester. So I knew, from reading articles or, kind of basic knowledge of what cancer was, but I didn't necessarily have that background, but still found someone who was willing to kind of take me in and teach me about that. And I think that's really important too. With nutrition, kind of going off what I said earlier of nutrition is not just dietetics. If you want to counsel actual patients and be in a hospital or food service or community setting, being a registered dietitian is really important. But to do nutrition research, you don't necessarily need to be an RD. And I've kind of been learning that myself, because I kind of have a lot of imposter syndrome with that, because I'm well, I'm not an RD. Who am I to say anything about nutrition? But I do have that education and that background. Obviously I'm not out telling people what they should eat for diabetes or something like that. But, you can have passion for nutrition and learn about nutrition, even if you're not an RD. And then if you want personalized nutrition advice, going to an RD is, something that you can do, obviously. But you can pursue it and kind of learn about it and research in it without necessarily having to jump through all those financial hoops, just to have 2 letters behind your name.
Yeah. And like you're saying, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to counsel patients or if you want to do research, that your pathway or what education you get, that will, or your end goal will kind of guide you. But one thing that I've been told, and I absolutely agree with, is we don't have to know exactly what we want to do with our lives.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm still not sure. So.
Yeah, I tell myself I know what I want, but we all know that will likely change.
Yeah.
Probably 10 times before I'm done.
Yeah. And I guess kind of going off that too, one of my biggest things is that, if I had not shadowed people in the areas that I thought I wanted to go into, I would have ended up being a dietitian and I would have ended up not liking it because being able to shadow people like even like occupational therapy and physical therapy, like I wanted to do in undergrad. If I had shadowed them and realized I didn't want to do that, it would have been like a bad time once I got to the end of it. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't like this.
Absolutely.
So yeah, like getting to know people in the field that you want to go into and like shadowing people, talking to people, that is also really useful.
Yeah. And you can, people like, I didn't even realize this, but like you can have internships and stuff while you're in graduate school, and you can be doing those shadowing or interning opportunities while you're still trying to finish your degree. And I think that's, if you're somebody who's kind of questioning what your path looks like, that's an opportunity we all have, or most of us have, I should say. Maybe not all of us, but so I have a couple of little personal fun questions. What's your favorite beer? If you like beer, I think you like beer. I think you shared that you like beer.
Yes,
so what is your favorite?
So I was thinking about this earlier because I love a good like local brew, right? Yes. So I even went to like a local brewery last night with some grad school friends, and like they have a really nice cream ale. Like, love a good local brew. If I had to pick like just a domestic beer, I love Blue Moon with an orange slice.
Oh, that's so classic. It's pretty classic.
Yeah, that's my favorite. So if I'm feeling cheap though, like I'll probably just get a PBR, but like I'm not picking like.
There's places, I don't even know how much PBR costs, but there's places around here that it's like $2 for a PBR. And I'm like, wow, that's so cheap.
Yeah.
And again, everything is pretty cheap around here.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever had PBR.
It's worth what it costs. I can drink it, but if I could have a Blue Moon or like some local craft beer of some sort, like I would go for that over a PBR. But
support that local business.
Exactly.
I'm all about that. Like, we're a small town and we have like I think 4 or 5 breweries. In a very small town, which is hilarious.
Yeah, they're popping up everywhere.
Yes. And then our last little personal question is, what's your favorite book?
I wish I had like a really academic answer of like some really great nonfiction read that you can read. But usually when I read, like, when I sit down to read a book, it's to like, I really love books that let me like escape into a different world or like a different time or like something like that. And I guess my favorite like series is The Inheritance Cycle. I don't know.
Yes.
I love The Inheritance Cycle. Like, I will reread those books for like the rest of my life. Like, honestly, like they're my favorite.
Oh my God. I haven't read, it's been a long time since I've read those, but I remember loving them so much. Didn't they try to make a movie out of it?
Oh
and
my
it
God. Yes,
flopped?
it was so bad. It was so bad.
Yeah. Didn't he also write a new book? Isn't there a new book that came out?
He wrote like a really short book recently. The Witch, the Fork, and I don't know, it had something with a fork in it. I can't remember off the top of my head. I read it. It was kind of like, it was so teasing though, because it kind of revisited the same like world and kind of gave you like a look in the future of like what Aragon and his, other characters were going through. It was really teasing, and it was like just enough to be like, oh, I want more.
Yeah.
So it was good though. But yeah, that's probably my favorite book series. Obviously I love like Harry Potter, like other like, fictionist worlds and things like that, but that one's my favorite.
I think Prussia has this statistic. It's an unofficial statistic, but most people say Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I remember her talking about that.
That one's an easy one because it's one that, everyone's read, but it's also a great story.
I like Harry Potter. For me, it's not my favorite book, but I was Harry Potter's age when Harry Potter came out.
Yeah,
so it's like I literally grew up with Harry Potter. So it has a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
Or I was around his age. I don't know if I was exactly the same age, but
yeah, same.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, for your lovely answers and for taking the time and talking with me, and just getting to know you a little bit has been very nice. I know you were probably like, oh my God, all I did is talk, but this interview was about you. So that's totally okay.
I do feel like that, but I appreciate you having me and listening to me for like 45 minutes. So.
Absolutely. And sorry about my cats.
No, you're good. No, mine started like sharpening his claws on my chair, and I was like, stop.
Oh, geez. They're cute, but
yep,
they're a mess.
do.
Well, there you have it, folks. Stephanie's interview taught us so much about how to be an advocate or an ally for people of all different backgrounds and all different abilities through our science communication, and also on our social media profiles. We will have the links for Stephanie's social media as well as the resources that she mentioned in the show notes below, so please take a look at those as well. And I really also want to thank Prasha for giving me the opportunity to come on here and interview different people for her STEM story. It's been a great learning experience. And if you listen to my episode, which is the episode before this, you can learn a little bit more about me and my background and why I'm actually here as part of the Her STEM Story team. So take a listen to that if you haven't already. Also, if you want to gather a few of the tips that Stephanie pointed out, I actually made a little bit of a list in the show notes so you can check those out below. As per usual, visit herstemstory.com to learn more about the podcast as well as find other episodes. Please rate Her STEM Story on iTunes or whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. And please find us on social media at Her STEM Story on Twitter and Instagram. Also, you can support Prasha and her efforts as the leader of Her STEM Story through Patreon at patreon.com/herstemstory. Check that out. For as little as $2 a month, you can support the podcast. And thank you so much for listening. And I really had a great time. This is my first interview I've ever done. And so if you have any feedback or want to reach out to me and talk to me more about my experience, please find me at grad_selfcare on Instagram or superchiasmatic on Twitter. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks to Catherine and our special guest for being on the show. Please use the links in the episode notes to find out more about these amazing ladies. If you listen to our show, don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes and get a chance to win our Diversity in STEM sticker. So please leave us a review, tell us how we're doing, and thank you so much for listening. Bye.